Hi, my name is Victor.
I'm Jonny Allen.
We are two members of Sandbox Percussion. We're thrilled to be speaking with you right now. We're excited to be introducing a new piece that we actually just released on an album this past fall. It's called 7 Pillars by Andy Akiho. It is an 80-minute long piece, 85-minute long live performance. And we released the album, I believe, this past September. And the album is in 11 movements, so 11 different tracks. There are 7 ensemble movements and 4 solo movements. And it has been an incredible journey putting this music together, recording the music with Andy. There's been many years of workshops and residencies at various different locations on the East Coast. And we are thrilled to be sharing it with you right now.
The general scope of the piece is this sort of palindromic structure. So the first piece kind of has its parallel in the last piece, second piece has its parallel in the second to last piece, so on and so forth, kind of culminating in the movement that everybody knows and loves, the classic Pillar 4. That is right at the center of the piece, and it's actually the first movement that Andy wrote. He wrote that back in, I think it came out in 2014. So we knew Andy had this idea for the larger piece. We didn't know exactly what that meant. I don't think Andy knew exactly what that meant. But in 2018, we started developing that larger work in earnest. We knew Pillar 4, and actually the Glockenspiel solo was also written, but that left 9 other movements.
That's right.
Not to mention just the order of things. I think even at that point, Andy knew he wanted this to be a kind of palindromic thing where the structure of quartet, solo, quartet, quartet, solo, repeats itself on the other side. But we didn't know, is it going to be 2 quartets off the bat, then a solo, or is it going to be 1 quartet and then the solo? So in that very first year, the first thing we did, right, was just kind of sit down with a piece of paper and map out exactly how this palindrome of sorts was going to work.
That's right. It's actually it's taped up on the wall behind us right now.
You
can't see it right now because it's cropped out. But yeah, that was our first year at Avaloch. We decided with Andy that the way that we were going to bring this piece to life was to spend a great deal of time with Andy working on music and working on actually the relationship that our quartet had with him, to get him to really understand who we are as a quartet, how we play together, how each of us play as individuals. And he really learned that in that first month at Avaloch Farm Institute, when we were playing a lot of Pillar 4, we were playing a lot of Andy's other music, making some recordings of some of his other percussion music, and really just getting to know us as people and as players. And I think that has really helped inform the whole piece.
One other thing that kind of came next after setting up just that first skeleton of what is the order of the movements going to be, we also came up with this kind of energy map of the whole piece. So we knew Pillar 4 was this, densely knit structure of mostly intense music, but everything else was a blank canvas. And so we tried to come up with an actually semi-accurate flow of, the piece is going to start this way, and then it's going to come down, and then it's going to grow here, and then it's going to stay that way, or whatever it is. And then we kind of held as true as we could to that. But then, of course, Andy's job was to go in and populate that with all the craziness that that he's capable of. It was funny because that first summer when we were working with Andy, I think the 4 of us in Sandbox were pretty antsy to get notes, to get the piece written and all this stuff, and Andy had this term he would use. He would call it sharpening his axe, which
That axe is pretty sharp.
some would call it procrastination, but actually what was happening was he was really getting a sense for just who we were as people. I think, Vic talked about this a little bit, but getting a sense for our workflow. And I think we didn't even understand at the time how closely we really would be working with him. And if we had just jumped into that, not understanding what that meant or how each other just were as working collaborators, I think the whole thing might have imploded. So we really spent that first month developing just a rapport and a way of communicating as efficiently as possible, because that really came in handy the next summer, which maybe we can talk about. That's really when some more concrete ideas for the piece started getting kind of shaped and formed.
That's what I was thinking, yeah, like the next year, the next 2 years even, in 2019 and 20, we actually started to really write and sketch out a lot of the material that was going to be in the sort of final piece. And that was a really fun process for us, because a lot of times we would just get together, the 5 of us in a room at Avaloch or at PS21, and we would sort of be like human playback a little bit for Andy. He would come in with this ostinato idea, and he's like, okay, you play this ostinato, it loops over 25 beats, and then you're going to play this melody in 7, but that's going to loop over top of this melody that's in 5, and like we're doing this crazy math to figure out like where it finally lands.
Now do it in triplets.
Right, yeah. And to kind of have Andy sort of like sit back and be able to listen to that and listen to what it sounds like on the real instruments with us playing and him just kind of like sketching it out on the spot, I think that was sort of critical for him for actually developing what the vocabulary for the piece was going to be.
Yeah, there was this really incredible feeling of just being in the room with Andy, who undeniably was composing this music, but what made us feel so connected to it? Because he was telling us what to do, but every now and then we would say, oh, like, this works particularly well, or that seems like, maybe it won't work as well, but like, I don't know, what was our role in that process?
I've always thought of putting this piece together with Andy being more like we're actually a quintet in ways than a quartet, because Andy has this infectious energy that he brings to the table when he's working on music with you, writing music with you in the same room. And I think actually that's similar to the way that we rehearse and the way we think as a quartet and as an organization. And I think that we really, like, our energies kind of met in the perfect way when we were workshopping this piece together. And I think that is, we all kind of shared this sort of interesting role. Obviously, Andy wrote all the music and he had the ideas for the piece, but I think we feel very connected to the process of how those notes were finally created. I think that kind of goes, that's really the spirit of our organization. Like when we were founded, we really wanted to be working closely with composers, and I think we've never worked with a composer in this close of a way, and I think it's something that we see our organization doing more of in the future.
Yeah, we got to watch the inception of almost every idea in the piece. I mean, really, there were only a couple movements that happened without us there watching him experiment with things and asking us to play things and layer them on top of each other. And there's something about just getting to be there in that moment and participate in that energy that I wouldn't trade for anything.
That's a good point. I mean, I think we love talking about the moments when we were in the room with Andy and like working with Andy intensely, like burning the candle at both ends, like how we were all sort of having this sort of like this role together to bring this music to life. I think on the flip side of that, I've said this before, and I think it's so beautiful and interesting about this piece, is there are sort of like a pocket of musical moments in this piece that Andy sort of created that we were actually not a part of really at all. I think I can think of like a handful of moments in Seven Pillars that are really very, because the piece is very like, it's very high energy, it's very, I guess, extroverted in a way, as Andy's music sometimes is, but there's a lot of moments in the piece where the music actually really goes inward, and we get to see like this total other side to Andy, this more kind of sensitive and lyrical side. A lot of times those moments were written with us kind of not in the room, you know?
Yeah, you're thinking Pillar 6.
Pillar 6.
And Aria.
And kind of like sort of every solo, to be honest. I mean, obviously, like we were working, when he had the ideas, we were working in close connection with him on the solos, but a lot of the times, like Amethyst, he brought these really beautiful like textures to the table that I think are very different from the ones that we had when we were working together with him in the same room. So after a few years of developing the music with Andy, we were very fortunate to have a world premiere lined up in March of 2020. And that was, of course, canceled for the reasons of the pandemic and our world's health crisis. So after that world premiere got canceled, we found ourselves with a lot of time on our hands. So what we decided to do with that time was to pivot our focus of Seven Pillars to be less on live performance and more on creating an album, creating a recording of the piece. So we basically spent the next, I guess, year and a half or so having multiple recording residencies in various locations, 3 locations actually, Avaloch Farm, PS21, and this room right here. So we shifted our focus to create this album. And then in addition to creating the album, we also commissioned 11 different filmmakers to create 11 different videos for each of the 11 movements in the piece. And that is called the Seven Pillars Film Anthology. It's actually available as a full video on our YouTube channel to check out. And that process, both putting together the album recording and the film project, has been an incredibly collaborative experience in a similar way to how actually creating the music for the piece was with Andy. Creating the music was obviously very collaborative with Andy, but then we had the chance to invite all these other creative people into our artistic family. And getting the chance to do that has just been overwhelming with the amount of energy and enthusiasm and talent that people have brought to the table to create the album, to create the films, when we're just so happy to have so thrilled with the product that we have, and so thankful that people are able to watch it now.
Part of the genesis for this film anthology project really came from the fact that Andy is an intensely visual person. He actually has synesthesia, which is an interesting thing where he associates sounds with colors. Actually has a whole series of pieces like dedicated to this phenomenon. But his music is just incredibly visceral and evocative of imagery and stuff like this. So it just felt so natural to take the album and what was not going to be a conventional album release just because of the uncertainty in the world, and create this kind of visual journey that the whole piece can go through as well. And then the question became, well, what sort of visual journey is it? Is it an animation? Is it a dance? Is it a story of sorts, or a clear narrative? And
the answer is all those things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Andy's always struggled with, what is this piece about? And to him, it's just about however you hear it, it's about that underlying structure and the myriad of emotions that can come out of it. And so exactly like Victor said, we ended up having one film be an animation, another film be a choreographed dance, another film be a little bit more like a avant-garde narrative, and some other kind of more classic performance videos of us playing, but with some other interesting details in there. And through that process, we ended up with this team of like 40 different collaborators, most of which being brand new to us, to really help, I don't know, we learned so much, and every time we get to meet a new artist and hear and see their reaction and digestion of this music, it reveals things to me inside the piece that I maybe wasn't hearing or thinking before.
So one of the films that we created was the last film, Pillar 7, the last movement of the piece. It was actually created by a good friend of ours, Michael Joseph McQuilkin, who is actually our director and lighting designer for the live version of the project. He was hired to be one of our film collaborators for the film project, but then he is also a huge collaborator of ours for the live performance as well. So throughout our time at these different residencies that we had in the past few years, we invited Michael to join us and to talk with him a little bit about what we wanted the live performance to be. As Johnny was saying, Andy is an intensely visual person, and we wanted to make the live performance as well as aurally stunning. We also wanted it to be visually very interesting as well. So we worked with Michael to develop all of this staging and lighting design in the live performance. Michael had the idea to bring in these Astera tube lights. We have these 7 Astera tube lights that are connected through an app that we trigger on stage live with an iPad. Those lighting designs that he created are very specific for each movement of the piece and how they move from each piece to the next. In addition to that lighting design that he created, he also choreographed a whole sort of stage movement that happens throughout the piece. The way that we move instruments from one movement to the other, the way that certain instruments are highlighted for certain ensemble movements and for certain solo movements. It's all directed and created by him, in addition to the lighting design. So the live show, this has sort of been the spirit of this piece, 7 Pillars, that it has taken on many different forms. Of course, it's an album. It's an album that we have released where people can enjoy just the audio. It has this whole film project where we have brought in 40 plus collaborators to create the film project. And then in addition to that, it also, of course, has a live performance that Michael Joseph McQuilkin helped us to develop.
Really a full-on sensory experience there with the
Yes.
live one. So like Victor mentioned, the Pillar 7 video is essentially just a video of what the live show is, but of course that's just the last movement. The live show does go on for the full 85 minutes, but with those lights and everything. I think it really helps to be even more connective tissue between the movements, because Andy had a tough task that even though it's one massive 80-minute piece, he also wants it to be excerptable. You could play just the vibraphone solo, or just Pillar 4, as has been done many times, just Pillar 6, just Pillar 3, any of them. But it also can be played in complete succession. So naturally there are little logistical moves that have to happen, but it hangs together so well. We didn't want there to be a moment where the audience could kind of snap out of it and remember they're sitting in an audience watching a show. We want them to be captivated the whole time. And I think this lighting design and these kind of conscious stage moves that Michael's helped us develop, those really help kind of create a singular package to deliver the music and the full experience.
I think it's also really important to note that Andy and Michael have been collaborators for a really long time. So there's an incredible amount of trust that was with that collaboration. I remember when we were developing the live performance, Andy was like, we got to bring in Michael. Michael's the guy. Yeah. He understands visually what my music is doing aurally. So I think that I actually remember there was a moment at Mana Contemporary when we were workshopping the piece. This is an artist venue in New Jersey. We were workshopping the piece with Andy and Michael. I believe this is the first time we were all in the room together really workshopping the music, working on the music and the live show. And Andy kind of had a rough idea in his mind. It was actually written in the score for Pillar 4 what the sort of stage setup would be for the whole piece. And we came in, we set it up in the room with Michael. Andy was off composing at the time. And Michael was looking at it and he was like, yeah, this doesn't work. So he completely changed the way we set up all the instruments, just changed what it would look like visually, and said and felt like he had an idea in his mind for where he could build off the whole live performance, the live experience of this show. And we were, I think it was like a little like nail biter moment when Andy finally walked back in the room, and we showed him that we totally changed his conception of how it was going to be set up. And Andy was like, that is it. That is perfect. This is exactly why Michael is here, because he understands the way this is supposed to look. He understands what my music is trying to do way better visually than he could or I could or any of us could. And I think that is why we are so excited to have Michael be a part of this, because he really understands sort of the language of what we have.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things, is that each of us really trusted each other to excel in their domain. And having that trust, which obviously came from that very first year at Avaloch, the whole month together, having that trust as kind of the bedrock of the process was really crucial. Seven Pillars is stretching us in a lot of ways. Clearly, it's been a huge time commitment, but also just technically, I don't think we've ever played pieces quite as difficult in many ways as Seven Pillars. One specific way in which Andy really asks a lot of us is that he actually has this incredible background in drum corps. I think he marched in the cadets. Mm-hmm. He brags about that all the time, as he should. And none of us actually marched DCI, though, I had my healthy obsession, for sure, for a time. But I think if you listen to the first 2 minutes of the piece or something of Pillar 1, you immediately hear that DCI influence, and it comes back time and time again. So we had to spend a ton of time just figuring out exactly how to get that level of clarity and precision that, a drum corps would have, which is something we're just, so incredibly inspired by. So that's been a blast, just to zoom in that fine level of detail.
Yeah,
on
Andy
every note.
really brings that to the table, I think. When he's in the room with you, he is, hyper listening to, especially in moments in Pillar 1, where it's really sort of just like very drummy, very much coming from this drumline background. He's listening so intensely at cleanliness, and I think has really sort of encouraged us and pushed us to expect that from ourselves, playing not only just Seven Pillars or Pillar 1, but anything that we play. I think he really brings that sort of precision and clarity to the table. Also, to add, I think one of the things that excites us about being a percussion quartet and working on a new piece with a new composer is actually realizing that we are being asked to do something that we are not yet good at. And there is something really fun about taking this thing that we realize we're not very good at and then working really hard on it until we actually are quite good at it. And I think one of the things that comes to mind is Pillar 2, where we are asked to do all these very fast, very rhythmic sort of bowed notes across the vibraphone and the crotales. Very fast bowed notes, and we have to quickly muffle them in very specific places of the beat. And I think that when Andy first gave us this music, we were like, this is impossible. Like, this is crossing the line of what is possible on these instruments. But sure enough, Andy gave us a little bit of a push, and we realized that there were things in there that were possible. And I think we also just worked a lot at it, so we got better at it. But because we went through that process, we are now able to do something that we couldn't do before as individuals and as a quartet. And I think that's something that's really exciting about music making for us, and something that Andy has really pushed us and encouraged us to do more of in this piece.
The last one I would mention is the final 2 or 3 minutes of the piece feature this I guess you could call it an ostinato of sorts, but it's just these quintuplets, like
how many notes do you play?
flashing by. I mean, I think between the four of us, it's like 5,000 notes in the last 2 minutes or something. But this is an effect that, so Andy is also a steel pan player, like a virtuoso, and he has this ability to just float over that instrument. He'll play these arpeggios lightning fast, but you know, it just sounds like an exhale to him. And that's what he wanted with these quintuplets, is just this like smooth as butter. You don't even hear articulation. It's just like, you know, like breathing. Obviously, that was tricky when he gives us the music and we have to record it the next day. But
practice literally all day.
Yeah. But it's something that, you know, now hearing him play the pan and hearing him kind of speak the part and how he wants it to be, it has become, you know, at least closer to that feeling of just silky smooth. You don't even perceive it as a rhythm anymore.
Just a texture.
Just a texture. But actually that moment when he was writing Pillar 7 and we were recording Pillar 7 and other people were editing what had been recorded the previous day, this was our first recording session up in New Hampshire at Avaloch Farm. And talk about like just pressure cooker is the wrong word because that makes it sound negative. It was really like just a think tank, a brain trust of sorts where everyone was working as hard as they could on this project to try and make it the best it could possibly be. I don't know, it doesn't get much more fun than that. I think one of the advantages of working with Andy, who has some knowledge of percussion, is that he knows that there are a lot of different sounds we can get out of just a single instrument. And one great way to do that is by changing the implement. So rather than us playing the whole piece with ordinary mallets, we play with all kinds of different crazy things. I mean, at one point we're using the timbale sticks, the conquistadors.
A lot of moments.
Yeah. And at some points we're using just the shafts of mallets. Actually, Vic Firth was nice enough to send us just mallet shafts, I think for the marimba with the little moleskin on there.
Your soul only has one conventional mallet, really, that you use on the vibes.
Exactly. Yeah, I use, I think, the part of the contemporary series, but then I'm using another timbale stick and actually a dreadlock to get this kind of pitch cluster on the vibraphone. Really gorgeous stuff.
Yeah, I think Andy is always trying to unlock every single timbre that he can get out of each instrument, and in order to do that, a lot of times he has to go and sort of tinker with a lot of other implements. So we have certainly used many different kinds of implements on these instruments.
Yeah, of course, there's the bows, and then there's even resonator glisses, just running the stick against the resonator, and rubber band snaps, putting a rubber band around the vibraphone bar or even just a table and snapping it back.
Yeah.
So
these kind of Bartok pits.
Exactly. And so that's how he's able to just use this relatively small collection of instruments but tease out 85 minutes of music.
So one of the really interesting things about playing the whole piece live is that after we play it, we get off the stage, and usually the first question that people ask us is, how did you memorize the entire piece? And the answer is not that we are some superhumans that can memorize ridiculous things. The answer is actually that we have spent many, many, many hours over many years working on this music. It's not like we got the music a month ago and we memorized all 80 minutes at once. We got different movements from Andy at different times. Like we were saying before, we workshopped a lot of the music with Andy, so we already have in our minds a lot of the vocabulary and a lot of the sort of math that he uses to actually construct the piece. We have a lot of that in our head already, and it's something that we have been learning over the course of many hours of practice, many hours of rehearsal together, a lot of hours with Andy, really understanding what his music is doing, like what the actual sort of structure of the music is doing. And because we've spent that much time really understanding the vocabulary of the music, I think that it's been easier for us to actually sort of internalize it and memorize it. I think that it works well actually playing a lot of Andy's music from memory because it is music. Once you sort of learn what it is structurally doing, it is actually quite possible to really internalize the playing of it.
One of the trickier moments was when we first kind of had the music long enough to have it memorized, and we showed up to a workshop with our stage director, Michael Joseph McQuilkin, and Michael started adding lighting cues to the piece. So then this music that was kind of right on the verge of being memorized or just falling apart, now we're adding in, okay, just add a light cue on the and of 3 there, try and cue this light, and, you know, drop out a beat if you need to. It's like easier said than done, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we have spent a lot of time like learning how to do it, but I will say it's quite an intense experience to play the whole piece, the 80 minutes. I always feel like when I get behind my instrument, like I'm strapping into like a fighter jet or something, and I'm just like gonna take off with like my friends here on stage. But it's definitely a lot of fun.
But now it's second nature. You just cue it like it's an instrument. Kind of the icing on the cake here was, you know, after all the work developing the piece and recording it and releasing it, it actually was nominated for 2 Grammy Awards, Best Chamber Music or Small Ensemble Performance and Best Contemporary Classical Composition. And to say we were thrilled about that is an understatement. I mean, it's always been this far-off goal of maybe one day we'll, you know, get nominated for a Grammy, but you don't talk about that, you know, because it's so out of your control. You just dream about it, and for it to happen with this piece the way it did, I mean, we're still pinching ourselves. We feel incredibly lucky, and just honored to be kind of part of that community now too.
Yeah, I think that the recognition from the Grammys is exciting for us because it really means that the piece is just going to get in front of a lot more people, a lot of people that we would not have been able to get the piece in front of. You know, it's this kind of widens the reach, I think, of the piece. And that is, of course, goes without saying, that's very exciting because we put a lot of time, a lot of effort into bringing the piece to life. We are able to enjoy it, our audience members are able to enjoy it, but I think hopefully now a lot of other people are able to enjoy it too.
Yeah, I think we'd always felt that percussion chamber music belongs on that stage, on that platform with all the other great chamber music. And I think when we were kids, maybe we felt like that wasn't the case, but now I think there's no doubt about it. You know, percussion chamber music is just chamber music. It's just great music, and I think we're excited to keep pressing that further.
In addition to our nomination for the Grammys, 2 other really incredible percussion quartets have also been nominated. It's so cool to see so much percussion music kind of getting recognized by the Grammys and getting in front of all these other people. Third Coast Percussion and So Percussion have both had pieces and performances nominated for the Grammys as well. So we're incredibly excited to be in their company, to know that there's so much percussion music that is getting in front of people. So that's really cool.
Yeah, what a time for percussion in general, that it's no longer this niche thing in the back of the orchestra, although that's great, of course, but to have it now front and center and getting nominated for Grammys through many different groups. I mean, it's just really incredible. I didn't think I'd see it in my lifetime. Yeah.
Seven Pillars, again, has been an absolute joy for us to work on over the past year and a half or so, longer actually. But developing this music with Andy, developing these videos, developing the album. We're going to be touring the piece, the live version of the piece. We have a bunch of different concerts lined up in the spring. We're going to be touring it obviously for years after that as well, so you can keep a lookout for performances of Seven Pillars.
That whole film project, the Seven Pillars Film Anthology, is available to watch on our YouTube channel right now.
Thank you so much for watching, for checking out Seven Pillars, for listening to the album, watching the videos, hopefully maybe seeing us play it live as well. It's super cool that you're able to see this piece.
Yeah, the scores are going to be coming out soon, getting published here, so have at it. You know, learn any of it, all of it. It's really incredible music. And we're really looking forward to having some live Q&A sessions on the Vic Firth channel, so stay tuned.